10-year period we will examine. In it came birth of the traffic light. In a way, that Cleveland invention marked the green light for huge change. But hold on, so much more came during a short period of time, 100 years ago.
It was a new time. The speed of life in Cleveland had picked up. The automobile had changed almost everything. Motorized wheels put the city in a faster lane. So much so Clevelander Garrett Morgan saw need for the world's first electric traffic light. He put his invention at East 105th Street and Euclid, where it was all stop or go, on order. The year was 1916. There was so much change 100 years ago in so many areas, the world took notice. From 1910 to 1920, Cleveland stretched and made history.
There is improvement, there's discussion, there's progressive vision all over the city.
John Grabowski knows, as Senior Vice President of the Cleveland History Center's Western Reserve Historical Society, he is steeped in the past. Here he leads a tour centered on Cleveland in its early 20th century car making.
This is of 1914 Peerless. Peerless was a company in Cleveland.
But our story is of more than Cleveland as the first motor city. It is also about Cleveland firsts in social and cultural accomplishments beginning in 1910.
In 1914, the federal government decides that Cleveland deserves a Federal Reserve branch. That same year, in 1914, Frederick Goff starts the Cleveland Foundation.
To understand this progress, begin with money and millionaires who wielded power from their mansions. Most of those mansions are gone now, but some still stand. The Hay McKinney home, now part of the Western Reserve Historical Society, where there are tours.
Welcome to our humble state, our Western Reserve here. You visit frequently?
The industrial tycoons who gave money helped begin many of Cleveland's cultural, social, medical, and educational institutions. They lived in homes like Hay McKinney, completed in 1910.
Challenge the rest of the entrepreneurial, wealthy society in town. Many of them spurred on each other to create the other institutions that we have today.
1915, and you're looking at the birth of the Cleveland Playhouse and what becomes Caramoo House. The next year, 1916, the Cleveland Museum of Art opens its doors to the public in June.
Still, there was widespread need, with immigrants from Europe and growing populations of blacks moving from the segregated South. Cleveland grew to nearly 800,000 that decade. Organizations to help settle new Clevelanders began with money donated for families to climb an economic ladder. Millions more dollars went elsewhere in growing Cleveland.
In 1917, the Cleveland Metro Parks were established. In 1918, the Cleveland Orchestra has its first performance. If you were in Cleveland, you could rightfully feel that you were at the center of the world.
The old money wealthy often had made their fortunes in that Gilded Age from the 1870s to the early 20th century. Museum interpreter Stephen Masinsik daily walks a historical pathway.
This is a period when architecture was reviewing how houses functioned.
When the guests came in, the homeowner would want this to be a showplace.
Yes, very much. The house actually had staff on hand. There were 7 to 9 people that were employed here. We actually have the census.
So at that time period, families would sit down to dinner in a room much like this.
Sure, this is representative here at the Hay House of this form of living.
In the houses of many Cleveland wealthy businessmen of the time, they straightened their bow ties before they went out, and then they began to check their pocket watches to see exactly what time it was. Time was beginning to change. So they gave money to cultural and social organizations. The time was 1910 to 1920. And when they put on their brand new hats, a new Cleveland was about to begin.
Many of the things we enjoy, culture, art, and education, are built with that money.
Indeed, a progressive time. In 1916, suburban East Cleveland became first in the eastern half of the U.S., where women gained the right to vote, 4 years before nationwide women won the vote. As well, dozens of today's Cleveland organizations began on donated money between 1910 and 20. Cleveland, 100 years ago, the way we were.
Now, in this time period, Cleveland grew from 6th to 5th largest city in the U.S. Between 1910 and 1920, Cleveland City Club is formed. The ancestor of United Way begins. The village of Nottingham and the community of Collinwood are annexed into Cleveland. The Cleveland NAACP begins. The local Urban League. City Hall is dedicated. The Indians win the World Series. And a year later in 1921, Cleveland Clinic begins. This is Leon Bibb reporting. That's the way we were.